What's up everyone, it's Dakota, and welcome back to another Modern video. This video we're going to be going over a deck that's near and dear to my heart, bringing me the highest highs and lowest lows of competitive Magic, and it's kind of seeing a resurgence back in the format, a little different from the last time that I played it and that I had seen it, so that's going to be exciting. And if you've watched my channel many years ago, probably like 2019, 2018, you'll know what deck I'm talking about. We're going to be looking at Grixis Death Shadow this week in Modern, just with its recent resurgence and just people in general just picking the deck back up and playing it. It's surged, I think, to the top 3 or top 5 most played decks on Goldfish for the Modern metagame. So before we get into the deck, though, I would appreciate it that if you are already not subscribed to the channel, that you subscribe to the channel. I post videos like this every week. I look into Modern, I look into Pioneer, and here soon, I believe even this week, I'm going to be playing some of the decks that I've already done deck techs on and just play some games and try to go a little bit more in depth with the decks that I play, just to kind of help out players that are learning to play the deck, or maybe people that are already seasoned with the deck. Just look at someone else getting some reps in and get to draw their own conclusions and judgments as I draw my own. So that'd be really cool. And if you're already subscribed to the channel, I thank you very much for your continued support and watching my videos. It always warms my heart watching just people enjoy the content. It really means a lot to me. So with that long-winded intro out of the way, let's take a look at Grixis Death Shadow for the Modern format. So this is the Grixis Death Shadow deck we're going to be looking at today. It's piloted by Ariane. I'm hoping I'm saying that name right. 8-1 the Modern Challenge, good enough for second place, which is crazy because if you look at all the similar decks on the side here that Goldfish likes to show you, it doesn't really have a very good record. I mean, like, you have a 3-1 with like Dimir Shadow, but then all the other Grixis Shadow decks are either like at 500 or just like barely breaking, that 50% win record. So the first thing that we'll notice that Jangata is the companion, which basically tells us that Murktide is not in the deck. And when we had the initial Lurrus bannings, that's what people went to, was Murktide being one of the big threats, because if you play the deck back in, I think all the way even back to like 2019, 2020, Gurmag Angler was one of the big reasons that you could play the deck, because with how the deck was built, you could play it on like turn 2, and then you'd be able to back it up with like Stubborn Denial and things like that. And of course, you'll see as we go through, you actually don't see cards like Stubborn Denial in that, for a good reason. So crazy thing to me already is that like every Death Shadow deck, or Grixis Shadow, Mardu Shadow, whatever, has played 4 shadows, and this one is playing 3 to note. Probably a pretty fine number given the amount of solitudes going around. Death Shadow getting -X where X is your life total. So of course you have to be at 12 life or lower for this thing to even be able to stick around on the battlefield. It does have some neat tricks. We don't see it in the main board of this deck, and I've seen it kind of like waning. Back when we had Lurrus, you had 3 copies of Dress Down, or 2 to 3 copies of Dress Down in like your main deck, and then you usually had like the other one, your third copy or even your fourth copy in the sideboard. Here we actually don't have Dress Down in the main deck. It is in the sideboard, if I can find it right there. So quickly to go over it, Dress Down enters the battlefield, draws a card. Creatures lose all abilities, and you sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. Basically meaning that Death Shadow is a 13/13 with this in play. So first thing that I would look into, like when playing this deck, is to find out where your cuts are going to be if you want to play Dress Down in the main deck. I think that you should play Dress Down in the main deck because it is pretty good against like the 4 color decks and things of that nature. A lot of good like ETBs. Amulet Titan's another one that I can think of that that the Dress Down could possibly hose in a meaningful way. Also allows you to win a lot of games just out of nowhere. Your opponent's not going to block a 1/1 or a 2/2 shadow all that often, and then you Dress Down them, 13 them, and you probably just win the game at that point, just from how aggressively leaning that the decks usually tend to be, which we'll see with the next 2 creatures being the 4 Dragon Rage Channelers and 4 Ragavan. Staples of the format at this point, like Dragon Rage Channeler, with all these cheap spells and cheap cantrips that this deck has, the fact that you just get to rifle through and hurry up and find all of your big threats, finding multiple Dragon Rage Channelers, finding multiple Death Shadows, even being able to like bin Croxes off of them or just get to keep them and cast them for later. And in the new edition Ledger Shredder, which I believe would probably take the place over like Murktide, Croxa kind of doing the same thing. Ledger Shredder, as we all know, from Streets of New Capenna, it's completely blown up. Everyone thought it was good. Turns out it is very good. So then more people are playing it. And I like the suite of creatures here. Dragon Rage Chandler, Ragavan, and Death Shadow were like the cornerstones of like the GDS deck, and it was always kind of like what other threats that you want to play. While Croxa, I'm not the biggest fan of at all. I talk down on this card all the time. Off the top of my head, I can't think of a card to like replace for this. Dress Down would probably be the one that I would think of that you'd want to play over Croxa, but I guess at the point where the format is at, where you just want to have more threats in the Grixis Shadow deck, I am willing to lean more towards Croxa being an okay card to play. Just escaping it can usually be a liability because you spend a lot of resources, you fight your own Dragon Rage Channeler, and with Solitudes and March of Otherworldly Light and things like that, Croxa just ends up looking really bad, and Prismatic Vista also too. So a lot of removal that just like deals with it forever, not even just like getting to kill it, but just removes it forever is pretty rough. But I think it's a fine card to play with the style of deck that you're looking at. And of course, Ledger Shredder. Whenever a player casts their second spell each turn, it connives, and the key is whenever a player casts their second spell. So you can trigger it, your opponent can trigger it, and that's something that I noticed in one of the local stores that's actually having the Ohio Valley Championships. There was a person on camera that missed a ton of Ledger Shredder triggers. And I'd seen it from like a bunch of players like playing this card, so that is something to keep in mind that your opponent can trigger this also, and that it can be very beneficial for you. 18 lands, so you're very rarely going to flood out, but playing a long game like this deck can play. The fact that Ledger Shredder has the option to ditch like Croxas and other cards that are not relevant to get bigger, but it can also just like help you draw towards spells and like ditch some lands. Like this card just kind of pulls double duty, and being a 1/3 flyer, your opponent is happy with killing it because obviously you invested more mana into it than they did to probably kill it. But if this card goes unchecked, just getting to connive 2, 3, 4, 5 times with this card before your opponent is actually able to deal with it, maybe even getting a hit, just generates a lot more value than like their mana advantage from actually killing it. So we obviously have our creatures. This is the game plan that we're trying to enact. Why play Grixis Shadow? Why is any of these cards even like good? Essentially, and it's really with a lot of like the cards that we have that are super efficient. This is like the staple of Grixis. All the cards in it are super efficient for what they do, and they can get the job done on the back of these creatures getting to be super aggressive and generating a ton of value. So we have Fatal Push, Inquisition, Lightning Bolt being some of the one-ofs in the deck. Fatal Push is usually just an answer to the majority of like the threats in the format. Obviously, we don't have Yorion, Solitude, and Fury and things like that. If they get to stick around, that kind of sucks, but it is just efficient interaction for just about all the other creatures in the format and kills a lot of the good ones, minus like Murktide Regent. Inquisition, just I think playing 5 discard spells because you do have 4 Thoughtseize in the deck. You have 5 discard spells. It used to be like 6 or 7 was kind of like the line. And I think now it's down to 5 or 6. I think you could probably play an Inquisition somewhere else if you really like want the discard. But playing 1 Inquisition and 4 Thoughtseize, I think is totally fine just because you want the life loss from Thoughtseize. Inquisition definitely hits a lot of like the relevant cards. Sucks that it can't hit a lot of the stuff for like the 4-color deck, but against everything else, it's pretty good. Lightning Bolt, there's always like the cool tricks of just like bolting yourself to like grow a Death Shadow. Lightning Bolt also just kills like Ragavan's Dragon Rage Channelers and the sorts. Even like in range, Delirious Dragon Rage Channelers get hit by it. And like comboing Lightning Bolt with like some of your other smaller creatures can take out bigger creatures. Again, this kind of like gets to like coexist alongside like Unholy Heat, which is a lot better of like a card for removal purposes, for the fact that obviously Unholy Heat dealing 6 damage to a creature or a planeswalker is a lot more impactful than dealing 3 damage to any other target. Thoughtseize, just because it's take your opponent's best card or like the card that completely hoses you, you lose life in the process. Being able to go down to 5 on like turn 1 and like start playing Death Shadows as early as like turn 2, and getting to back it up with like a discard spell or even removal and things like that is pretty good, and that's kind of like where like the early power of this deck is. Getting to do the same thing with like Ragavan or like Dragon Rage Chandler is also very good. So then we have like our 2 mana spells: Drown the Lock, Expressive Iteration, Terminate. Drown the Lock counters the spell if your opponent has more cards in their graveyard, or if the converted mana cost of the thing you're countering or killing is less than the number of cards in their graveyard. So with Drown the Lock, getting to play against like Murktide is really awkward. Crazy as it is, but like Drown the Lock is so good just in the natural course of a game. You know, if a game goes long, Drown the Lock is essentially a counterspell, and even like in the early games, just getting to counter like 1 and 2 mana things is very good with everyone just wanting to crack fetch lands and things like that. Also of note, pretty good against like the 4-color control decks, 4-color elementals decks, etc. Just because of the fact that like they do tend to play a lot of fetch lands, and if they can't keep like a Ren 6 in play to sort of kind of mitigate like the number of fetch lands they put in their graveyard, Drown the Lock is more than likely going to be able to counter Solitudes, Furies, and Yorians of the like. Expressive Iteration, probably the best 2 mana spell in the format. Period. Um, it does a lot to like essentially like you look at 3 cards, like you essentially get to like 2 mana draw 2. And even though it's sorcery speed, you get to look at a third card. You know, this is a format where like Preordain and Ponder are banned, so like the fact that Expressive Iteration still gets to exist is probably not a good thing in terms of like those cards ever existing in the modern format. But Iteration is so good, and the fact that like its sorcery speed is the only knock that you can have to it, and even then, like it's not the absolute worst thing, you know. So very good card. Highly recommend. Like this is one of the cards that you don't cut. Like you just absolutely don't cut this. You don't try to play the other one from, I think it's New Capenna, or the draw 2 discard 1, whatever. Like this card is great. Always play it. To terminate, just hard answers to any creature. Can't be regenerated. I guess could come up in some corner cases like with Welding Jar and things like that. But terminate, just you know, quick clean gets the job done. Finally, we have 4 Bobble, which is kind of the glue that can kind of hold this deck together. Classic plays are like turn 1 Dragon Rage Chandler plus Mishra's Bobble to kind of set up like your draws and stuff. You know, if you like the card, then you can bobble your opponent, or things of that nature. Plus, Bobble just getting to draw a free card, giving you some information, can give you perfect information with like your discard spells by discard spelling your opponent on turn 1. After you bobble them, looking at their card and being able to take the best card given the situation, and getting to know their whole hand for a full turn cycle is pretty sweet. The mana base, cut simple. You have looks like 10 fetch lands with 4 Bloodstained Mire, 3 Delta, 3 Tarn, and then going with 2 Watery Grave, 2 Steam Vents, 2 Blood Crypt, and a Swamp and a Mountain. Obviously, the Mountain and the Swamp being the only basics versus like the Island and the or Island over the or Mountain over the Island, because we can do English. Mainly for the fact that like a lot of your spells are just red, and you don't necessarily want to take damage as aggressively as you did with previous versions. So having the mountain isn't nearly as bad as not having the mountain isn't nearly as bad as not having the island. The sideboard, obviously, still having to adhere to the Jengatha. So the answers that we have are like Kolaghan's Command, Mystical Dispute, which is usually for like the blue decks, Unlicensed Hearse being an absolute all-star. With a Delirious Dragon Rage Chandler and a Ledger Shredder that's successfully connived once, you can crew just any of your creatures can crew this Unlicensed Hearse, and it just gets huge. Um, it just getting to exile cards, and it doesn't even care like what the cards are. It just cares that it exiles cards from your opponent's library. Obviously, makes Drown the Lock a little bit worse when it comes to countering things, but usually the things that you're exiling with Unlicensed Hearse are going to probably kill you before you actually get the value for like Drown the Lock and things like that. So very, maybe not underrated sideboard card, but a very, very good sideboard card. Turok Dread Cantor, good against the 4-color decks. A lot of their removal is white, so the fact that like you can play this, and then if you kick it, get it to him to Turok them, and just get a 4/3 is really solid. And make sure your other discard spells, pseudo pump spells for the Turok. Two dress down again to kill those like annoying elementals or make it like very hard for them to actually get to stick around. They do get to keep the body, but a lot of the time it's a lot better than like losing your Death Shadow or multiple Death Shadows. Of course, a million and one different things that you can do with dress down, and a million and one different rulings with it that I will not get into because I am not near the smart enough person for it at this moment in time. But maybe we'll have a video over it one day. Spell Pierce, Flusterstorm, just cheap interaction. Flusterstorm, notably, only going for instants and sorceries, but definitely has like the higher upside of dealing with like other counter spells. Spell Pierce, I think the more aggressive one, just for the fact that it counters any non-creature spells. And there was a few matches I had seen over this weekend where Spell Pierce was just used to counter like expedition maps and things like that, and was able to hold off like Tron players and other like non Murktide decks kind of like develop their game plan up till the Death Shadow deck could actually win. Alpine Moon, I'm pretty sure how this one works is like Alpine Moon, you could actually name Urza Saga, and it just completely blows up Urza Saga because it gets rid of all the shit on it. So Alpine Moon, A1, definitely good enough to play. Can name Valakuts as well, so you just don't die to Valakuts from the like Titan deck or the four color like Omnath decks and things like that. And finally, one engineered explosives because rhinos are super annoying, and the Cascade decks are back in full force. Some of like the Asmo decks that might be coming around, like you can blow up their food with like the engineered explosives, and like their Asmos too, or even their cookbooks, whatever. Like I hate all of them equally. So that's the Grixis Death Shadow deck for Modern. And if you ask my opinion of the deck, it looks like it's pretty solid. Honestly, I look forward to actually playing this hopefully real soon for the channel just to get some matches in and draw up some more conclusions of it. It's definitely different from the typical Grixis Shadow decks that like I've played, where we played like Gurmag Angler and you had Street Wraith in the deck and things like that, to now just being this kind of like more tempo based like control deck where you can play like an early threat and like Ragavan or Dragon Rage Channeler super early, or even like a Ledger Shredder on turn 2. Getting to combo like Ragavan into Ledger Shredder and then still being able to leave a mana up like in the post-board games for like a Spell Pierce or Flusterstorm to like protect your threats, or even to just leave up a removal spell like an Unholy Heat or even like Lightning Bolt, follow it up with like a discard spell, whatever. There's just tons of different like lines that you could take with this deck, and this deck definitely walks a razor's edge to begin with. You're always constantly under the microscope. All of your plays are going to be judged not only by your opponent but like by yourself, because one misstep could possibly end the game for you. And this is definitely a deck that I think requires a higher skill level to be successful with than a lot of the other decks, but definitely has a high reward because it's a super satisfying deck to play. It rewards knowledge of the format, it rewards knowledge of the deck, and just overall like knowledge and just being able to think on your feet as well, like as you're playing the deck. So that's my analysis of the Grixis Shadow deck, and that's just the deck. Period. Love it. Grixis Shadow is always going to have a place in my heart. The only knock I can have on this is that it doesn't play four of them, but times are tough when solitudes are flying around. So that's going to do it for me in this video. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like on the video. Comment down below if you want to see this deck played, or if there's another deck that you would like to see me go in depth on in the coming weeks. Yeah, I'm going to get out of here. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next video.